Welcome everyone to our next session. If you're getting a cup of coffee or looking at emails, we invite you to come back and join us on stage. The mayor is in the back now, waiting for us to get started. I'll give it just a few seconds. Thank you, Mayor, for joining us today.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me. Can you hear me?
We can.
Good. It's good to be with you.
So I'm going to just give you a brief introduction, which is I know Houston is the fourth largest city in the country. I'm sure with what's going on today in the pandemic world and the economic crisis world, that you've got your hands full with a number of things. Why don't you just start by giving us a few opening remarks, and then I've got a few questions. We can have a good, robust discussion. Thanks, Mayor.
No, thank you, Steve. And I look forward to the conversation. So I'm not going to speak very, very long. Look, I have been mayor now for the last 5 years in the city of Houston, and we faced a number of 500-year storms. In fact, 3 of them just since I've been mayor. And then, of course, even before becoming mayor, I was a state representative in Texas and worked very closely with the energy, electric industry in the state of Texas. In fact, I was there, sat on the committee that oversaw the electric energy business industry. And I've been there when we restructured the generation as well as retail. And then, of course, transmission and distribution is still regulated in the state of Texas. So I've seen a lot of changes, technological changes that have taken place in the business. And now with everything that's confronting us, with the number of storms that are coming, greater frequency, intensity, costing even more, we have had to do some things in this city to prepare us and to make us stronger as we go forward. One of the plans that we've come forward in Houston, our plan for becoming a more resilient city, and it takes into account the shocks and stresses that we're having to face, including flooding, urban and extreme heat, air quality, inequities, health disparities, and economic downturns. And we are committed to leading the energy transition and set a target for attracting at least 50 Energy 2.0 companies to the greater Houston region by 2025. We also set a target to invest $50 billion regionally in major recovery, mitigation, and infrastructure modernization projects that increase our resilience by 2050, and then 2040. And lastly, what I would say, less than 30 days after releasing the Resilient Houston Plan, I declared an emergency because of COVID-19. The global pandemic has exacerbated the resilience challenge that we had before, and further clarified why the roadmap we set in place must be followed. We are committed to an equitable, green, and resilient recovery from COVID-19, and this includes making sure our economy is strong, our people are healthy, we increase equitable outcomes, especially for our most vulnerable, and we adapt and modernize our built environment and face the global challenge of climate change head-on through action, innovation, and partnership.
Thanks, Mayor. I think you've answered almost all my questions already. So let's tease out some of what you've said. I know you work closely with Centerpoint, and you probably know Centerpoint is one of my members at the GridWise Alliance, and they've certainly been a pioneer in this space over the last couple of decades, and continue to be that. Can you give us a few more specifics about what some of the things are that you're doing with them and sort of to address this resiliency issue?
Well, I will tell you that Centerpoint was the key underwriter of our climate action plan. So we worked hand in hand, and their contributions, their investment in that initiative helped to bring that about. It was the first ever climate action plan for the city of Houston, and it was just approved by, well, I announced it on Earth Day in April of this year. and it was approved by City Council unanimously, I might add, in October of this year. So Centerpoint has been a very close partner. And so that's on the climate action plan. But underneath our Resilient Houston plan, we have Evolve Houston, where the focus is on electrifying our transportation sector. Centerpoint is a part of that team. Centerpoint, Shell, University of Houston, NRG. But Centerpoint is very much a part of that Evolve Houston. And quite frankly, Elizabeth Brock, who's over there at Centerpoint, has been the point person in pushing that initiative forward. So when it comes to Resilient Houston, when it comes to the climate action plan, when it comes to meeting the goals and objectives and moving forward, Centerpoint has been at the center of that.
Yeah. Now you mentioned Evolve Houston, but is that part of a broader smart city, smart community action plan as well? There just seems to be so many dimensions of making a smart city these days, and resilience is one part of that. Electrification is another part. Tell us a little bit more about the comprehensive nature of your approach to your smart city efforts.
Smart city kind of is interwoven throughout all of our particular strategies. There are 23 departments here at the City of Houston, and the whole notion of smart city is kind of interwoven through it all. But respect to the let's say our transportation sector and fulfilling the goals of the climate action plan. And even before the climate action plan, we were talking about Evolve Houston, which is the strategy behind electrifying our fleet and the transportation sector in the City of Houston. In the climate action plan, we set a goal of what we call 30 by 30. And that is 30% of new cars, for example, being electrified by 2030. And in order for that to happen, you have to have the infrastructure in place.
Right.
And so it's working on that infrastructure, working on the electric charge stations, garnering the support of many stakeholders, not just one or two, but many. And we've started off with Centerpoint being at the lead, and then of course, as I mentioned, NRG, Shell, University of Houston, and then we go from there. But the goal for us, for example, is to have 100% of our light duty fleet at the City of Houston, and we have a relatively large fleet, for that to be 100% electrified. That's number one. And then when it goes to expanding beyond the city's fleet, with respect to the vehicles that are operating, trucks, cars operating within the City of Houston, that's 30% by 2030. And then when it comes to what we're doing, for example, at the airports, at Metro, our transit systems, it's about moving in that direction as well. So it's kind of starting with the City of Houston with our light duty fleet, expanding to other departments at the City of Houston, and then expanding out to the general marketplace. And Evolve Houston is the name of that initiative, and we're working very closely with the project manager by the name of LDR.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned in your opening remarks that you've seen a lot of changes. If I'm right, you were born and raised and lived in Houston all your life. I assume you've seen a lot of changes over the years. If you reflect over the past decade or two, what are maybe two or three of the most significant changes that Houston has seen? It doesn't have to be just energy changes, but just changes in general.
Well, yeah, I'm a native Houstonian, with the exception of the 3 years when I was in law school on the East Coast.
Okay.
I have been right here in the City of Houston. Let's say 25 years ago, or even let's say 10 years ago, the city was not nearly as diverse as it is today. Today, for people who hadn't been in the city, for example, in the last 10 years, you will come here today and you will marvel at the diversity. We are the most diverse city in the United States of America. Okay, one of 4 Houstonian is foreign born. So highly diverse in the City of Houston. It is a cosmopolitan sort of environment. I tell people that you can if you like country, you can find country. If you like chic, you can find chic. If you're cosmopolitan, metropolitan environment, you can find that. If you want high-rise living, you can find that. If you want something with a front yard and a backyard, you can find that as well. At the same time, there are more storms, 500-year storms that are coming with greater frequency, greater intensity, and costing us even more. And so 20 years ago, not nearly as many. You had some, but they weren't coming as often. Now, for example, before I became mayor in 2015, it was the Memorial Day flood, 500-year storm. 4 months after becoming mayor, it was the Tax Day flood. The following year, it was Harvey. 40% more rain fell on this city then than would have fallen 100 years ago. In 2019, it was Tropical Storm Imelda. This year, we had a number of storms that came in our direction. Only one came fairly close, but we were fortunate this year. But the storms are coming with greater frequency, greater intensity. And then lastly, what I would say to you, Steve, is that we had a study done, Dr. Catherine Aho, that indicated that if we don't change course by 2050, the average temperature in the city of Houston would be 106, and we would have at least 23 days where the temperature would be over 100 degrees every single year. So more people, more cosmopolitan, more diverse, but at the same time, more storms that are coming at a greater frequency.
Other than that, you don't have anything to do, right?
Well, let me tell you, even with that, it's a great city.
Yeah.
Because one thing that has not changed, the city that I grew up in was a can-do city. Dream big, made big things happen. That spirit of the city of Houston has not changed.
That's great.
I'm the son of a maid that worked at a hotel downtown, didn't graduate from high school, never learned how to drive. And today, that one of 9 kids reared by that mother happens to be the mayor of the city of Houston. That has
very impressive. Can you talk a little bit about the work you do with other mayors? I know you co-chair the Climate Mayors Group, and I guess in particular, not just what you do with them, but how you think what you do at a mayor's level can impact federal policy or state and federal policies.
Let me just say to you that mayors, at the mayor's level, is where the rubber meets the road. We are the closest to the people themselves, boots on the ground, boats in the water at the mayoral level. I happen to be a trustee of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I've served as the co-chair of the U.S. Climate Mayors. When the federal government, for example, withdrew from the Paris Agreement, we initially started with about 7 mayors that signed on saying we will adhere to the Paris Agreement. Since then, more than 500 mayors in the United States, blue cities as well as red cities, have signed on saying we adhere to the Paris Agreement. And then hopefully, when President-elect Biden comes in, he will rejoin. Mayors have worked together, for example, during Hurricane Harvey, when we lost a large part of our electric fleet. I turned to Mayor Garcetti out of LA, who had an electric purchasing agreement, like a co-op. And we utilized that co-op in order to rebuild our electric fleet. I am a part of the C40, cities from all over, mayors from all over the globe and cities that have joined in that initiative. Recently, for example, I was elected chair of the Global Resilient Cities Network, so from all over. So mayors work very closely together, even with respect to the Climate Action Plan. Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, in the city of Houston, in the state of Texas, have moved forward on their climate action initiatives. And we work very closely with one another, whether you're in the state of Texas or outside in the United States as well. So a lot of interaction, the sharing of ideas. Quite frankly, it doesn't make any sense to try to come up with something new if somebody has something that's working. And so we don't mind duplicating, copying, and then building on it.
Working together like that with all these cities, you must be able to have a pretty significant voice in Congress and with the president, or certainly with the new president that's coming in next month. Can you talk a little bit more about how you're trying to influence the policies at a federal level?
Well, I give a lot of credit to the previous presidents and to the presidents of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I will tell you, for example, that the president currently, Greg Fisher, out of Louisville, Kentucky, has convened a number of mayors together. Many of us have been on a call with the president-elect and the vice president-elect already, sharing some of our thoughts and ideas as we move forward. When it comes, for example, to renewables, you know, the president-elect has indicated an initiative of about $2 trillion. And what we are saying to the president-elect is that the best way to execute successfully that plan is to be working directly with mayors all over the United States. We have over 500 mayors from blue cities, red cities that have come together to adhere to the Paris Agreement. Many of us already have projects in place or have projects that are on paper, ready to be implemented. And so we look very closely to working with the administration, the incoming administration, as well as with Congress. When it comes to carbon sequestration and wind and solar, all of these infrastructure, green storm water infrastructure, for example, there are a lot of things that can be done with the support of the federal government that can expedite the accomplishment, the execution of these projects. Cities are ready to go. We just need good partnership at the federal, state, and then the local level.
Yeah. One of the questions from the audience that's come in is around the work that you're doing to incubate clean energy startups. I know that there's some pretty interesting things going on in Houston these days, working with Greentown Labs, Plug and Play, probably other organizations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, we have been working very hard the last 3.5 years to really build out our ecosystem. You know, Houston is a fantastic place. Largest medical center, energy capital of the world. Now talking about energy transition, which leads to, at the center of that is innovation. #1 port, a lot of things. And there's a lot of innovation that's taking place in those individual sectors, but we hadn't done a good job at creating a robust integrated ecosystem. We decided it's important to do that. And that if we work together, we can not only be walking in developing this new integrated ecosystem, but we can be sprinting. And so we have said to the world, look at Houston, you know, we've got the talent, we've got the diversity, the expertise is here. And so we're not trying to duplicate Silicon Valley, so to speak. It's hashtag Silicon Valley, the city of Houston. That's who we are. So Plug and Play from Silicon Valley has expanded here. Build.com has expanded here. Generation has expanded here. And now Greentown Labs, the largest incubator when it comes to clean tech and clean energies on the North American continent, has now expanded to the city of Houston as well. And we're excited about having them here. They will be taking over about 40,000 square feet in one of the buildings that's a part of our, I guess you can say, across the street from our innovation hub. And then as a part of the climate action plan, the goal is to attract 50 new 2.0 energy companies here in the city of Houston by 2025. And we're working with Rice University, their Carbon Hub, the University of Houston Carbon Management Program, Greentown Labs, the ION, which is the innovation hub in the city of Houston, a part of the innovation corridor, and then Houston Exponential as well as some others. So a lot of things are taking place, and we're doing discussion with the business community, because one thing, Steve, that we have found, there's no federal mandate, for example, for climate change. There's no state mandate for climate change. So for the city of Houston, the energy capital of the world, it is important for us to be very collaborative in working with some of the largest greenhouse gas emitters in the city of Houston in order to bring about this evolution that we are seeking.
Fantastic. let's turn. I mean, we've been talking about jobs now, economic development. Certainly, this next year, that's going to be increasingly important as we get through the pandemic and move on, hopefully soon. Let's bring up a topic that came up in our previous session, a couple of our previous sessions, is the topic of equity or energy justice or environmental justice or climate justice, whatever you call it. It's referred to by different terms, but I'm sure this must be an issue in Houston. And how are what you're doing with your climate action plan or some of your other work addressing this issue of equity?
Well, quite frankly, I would tell you that I think all of us, cities in particular, we have a moral obligation to make sure that we don't leave out any population, and that whatever we're putting in place speak to those populations that are more vulnerable and at risk. And what we have found is that whether you're talking about hurricanes or natural disasters, or whether you're talking about the pandemic, many of these same populations are disproportionately impacted. And these are communities, low-income communities, communities that have been underserved, but we have not invested in nearly as much. I grew up in one of those communities, Steve. And quite frankly, I will tell you, as mayor of the city of Houston, I still live in the same community in which I was born and reared. And so in these communities, for example, they are looking for affordable energy, okay, safe energy, clean energy, because not only are we talking about climate change or disasters, but we are talking about health inequities, income inequities. When they don't work, they hurt, okay? When their jobs are not available, they hurt. Or when they lose their jobs because of the pandemic and companies are laying off, they hurt. And their hurt is magnified even more. They're already operating at the margins. When it comes to transportation, many of them rely heavily on public transit to get them to their doctor's offices, to get them to their jobs, to go from point A to point B. And so in whatever we do, as we talk about, and you can't have resilience, we cannot have a resilient Houston without talking about equity. They go hand in hand. And so as we talk about climate change and improving, making things much, much better, we have to have strategies where they are front and center, clearly in mind. And a part of our climate action plan strategy is to have a climate action equity coordinator, so that as we come forth with these strategies, we are making sure that we are putting forth strategies with these populations in mind. Otherwise, they are in communities that will flood quicker than others. If they lose their homes, the impact on them is exponentially greater. They're in communities, for example, where the air may not be as clean and the water may be a little bit more contaminated. They're in communities, for example, where landfills have been. For example, in the Sunnyside community in the city of Houston, in Southeast Houston, landfill was opened in 1930. It was shut down in 1970. Those 300 acres have remained contaminated and right there since 1970. And it pulls down that whole community. So what we are doing now is that we are looking at taking those 300 acres and reimagining them, turning them into one of the largest urban solar farms in the country. And what that does is that it will provide job opportunities. It will reimagine. It will have a positive impact on that community. It will elevate that community, pull it up. It provides cleaner energy, not only for that area, but for the city as a whole. And so the benefits are multiple, and everyone is benefited by changing that particular environment. So it is a moral imperative as we talk about building a more resilient city, talking about climate change, a climate action plan, that we factor in the social implications and the inequities that have existed. And so it's not about building back. It's about building forward. That's what we are doing now when we are talking about all of the strategies that we're discussing today.
Yeah, fantastic. So our conference is largely focused on electricity infrastructure, the grid, you know, what can we do as an industry? And Centerpoint's obviously a great partner for you, and they're working with you. But if you talk to the broader industry, the vendors, the consultants, how can we work with you to help achieve your success?
You know, when I was in the legislature, and I know Centerpoint, Reliant, and so many of these other countries, companies will tell you very quickly that, you know, I was in favor of deregulating the marketplace, in favor of technology, which leads to many advancements, which can improve the products being given to the consumer, the end user. All of those things are good. I also wanted to make sure that we had, as a part of the strategy, the safety nets put in place so that we don't leave anyone behind. To make sure that, because people want safe, clean, reliable, and affordable energy. Yeah. And I want to underscore affordable, because if they can't afford it, it can be safe, it can be reliable, it can be innovative, but if people can't afford it, they cannot get it. So yeah. What does it mean to them? And so that's what I would say to the industry and to all of the partners, is that people want innovation. People want the technological innovations. They want competition, okay? They just want to make sure that they can participate in all the good things that flow therefrom. So it's important, for example, to have backup generation. That's important. Energy efficiency is important. All of the technological improvements. And then to make sure, for example, as we talk about electrifying the transportation network, help us in building out that infrastructure and making sure that that infrastructure includes all communities and not just some.
Well, Mayor, we're about out of time. You know, this is obviously a difficult time for the whole country, the whole world, and your city in particular. And you sound so hopeful, I guess, in the last 30 minutes. If anything, you've been expressed a lot of hope. Maybe you want to end by just telling us what's your one or two biggest hopes for the next decade or the next several years in Houston?
Well, you know, there is no question that, for example, that the climate is getting warmer, storms are coming with greater frequency, greater intensity, and costing all of us, whether it's people in business, whether it's homeowners, from all walks of life, is costing all of us. If we work collaboratively, we can turn this thing around. Yeah. And I know it can happen, because for the city of Houston and the state of Texas, no federal mandate saying we got to do this. There's no state mandate we're saying we have to do it. And in the city of Houston, we have some of the largest greenhouse gas emitters. But look what's happening in the city. We're working collaboratively. A climate action plan that's uniquely Houston, that calls for us to get to that net zero by 2050. Some companies said 50% by 2025, and then 2050 net zero, if not sooner. And I hope it will be sooner. But you have BP, for example, that's working with us. You have Centerpoint that helped to underwrite the climate action plan. You have Shell, for example, that helped to underwrite our Resilient Houston strategy. So it's all environmentalists and others at the table. Over 700 people participated in the climate action plan. But now the hard part is about execution, getting it done. And there is no doubt in my mind, Steve, that where there is a will to do it, it will get done. Because climate action is not just about the environment, it's about our economy, okay? It's about the quality of life. It's about saving lives. It's about providing a future for our families and for our kids. And it's not about building back. I want to underscore this. It's about building forward. And if it can be done in Houston, and it will, then it doesn't just provide benefits for the city of Houston, but for the global marketplace as well, because climate change is global and the city of Houston is a global city. And if it can take place in the city of Houston, the rest of the world will derive the benefits as well. And we're going to get it done.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great way to wrap up our session. Thank you, Mayor Turner, so much for the time you spent with us today. You've been clearly inspirational, and Houston is a leader in this space, and we're happy to have you talk to us about that. And anything we can do to help, we're more than willing to help. And so, on behalf of our audience, we can't really applaud you. I wish we could, but we appreciate the time you spent with us today. Thank you very much.
In employment, but you can move to Houston.
Yeah, that's right. All right. We're on our way. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. So with that, Rich is going to join us on stage and transition us to the next session.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Steve. I'll be really quick here, and thank you again, Mayor Turner.